I'm T-Set, and this is a tea time lapse. Alright, so I have a new thumbnail graphic that reflects my changes to my Sona, so now it's time to make a new PNG tuber. My first PNG tuber just sort of floats on top of the frame, and I've never been fully satisfied with that. It makes that element of the overlay feel like an afterthought to me. And because I edit her in at the end of the video, I sometimes put drawing footage behind her without realizing it. So this time I wanted to give her a spot in the overlay that doesn't overlap with the drawing footage. Early on, I had this idea that she would be sitting on this little seat made by the frame, but I ended up realizing that that would make her face be really small and just up in the corner, which isn't great for people who are viewing on their mobile devices. So even though I thought the pose was cute, I do end up scrapping that. And I returned to the idea of her talking to you from a table, same as in the first model, but this time she won't be drawing, she'll be having a cup of tea with you. I think that makes more sense as I am retrospective as I'm speaking to you in my videos. And once I had an idea of what the PNG tuber was going to look like, it was time to plan out how the frame was going to be shaped around her. Because much like there is a cutout for the drawing footage, I wanted there to be a cutout for the PNG tuber and have her be in a room behind the frame. Before I knew how much the frame was going to cover up, I did consider adding in dobin and some snacks onto the tabletop. I really did struggle on this shape for the partition in between the two frames. I thought it was too boring and inconsistent with the shapes for it to be straight, and so I kept trying to come up with creative divisions before I ended up deciding, no, let's just make it simple. Besides, making it a straight edge will make it very easy for me to hide the edges of the footage and the PNG tuber behind it. I ended up preferring the composition when there was a space up here at the top. But because the lettering for Monster felt inconsistent with the frame's aesthetics, I decided just to use T-Set, which is how I prefer to be called anyway, so it seems reasonable. But to use up the space to the left of T-Set, I added a drawing of the mechanical pencil that T-Set owns, as well as a brush, which led to me adding in all of these other elements on the frame of keys, wood sorrel, white clover, and some hydrangea flowerlets. But this did make me realize that in the future, I should make a version of T-Set Monster entirely in the T-Set lettering and a version entirely in the Monster lettering. I actually went outside and picked some white clover, wood sorrel, and hydrangea flowerlets to use as reference for this picture. Which is why you see the hydrangea flowerlets go from a more iconic shape to one more like the bush outside of my parents' house. Which does make them less recognizable as hydrangea, but I still think they're very cute. And I did group up all these extra details on different layers, so if I feel that it's too busy, I can always toggle them off. But I find that I really enjoy the comfy clutter in the overlays of some of the streamers I watch, so I really wanted to try it out. And now for flats. Don't worry, we will get to the actual PNG tuber in this video. It was just important that I knew exactly what was going to get covered up by the frame. Man, this text was so small, it was tricky to try to get it to look right and have line art around it, but not have the line art be too cluttered feeling. And of course, I had to make a cluttered version of the frame for videos that don't have voiceovers. At the end, I decided to replace this one key with another white clover blossom. And here's the finished frame for videos that don't have a voiceover. And here's the frame for videos with a voiceover. At this point, I was feeling very optimistic and excited to move on to the PNG tuber. Little did I know how sick and tired of it I would be as I neared the end. So I'm staying pretty simple with the new PNG tuber. It's going to be a little bit more complex than the one you're seeing in action on screen right now, but still pretty simple because I just don't want to bite off more than I can chew. And this ends up being the right move with how tired I was by the end of the process. I started off by drawing the normal speaking pose with a hand gesturing. Initially, I wasn't sure if I wanted the head to be looking straight on at the viewer, which is more how you would speak normally in the real world, or more of a 3/4, and I ended up going more 3/4. And next I drew a waving speaking pose for the start of my voiceovers when I introduce myself. The face does start off a little cursed, but it does get better with time and ends up becoming my favorite frame of the PNG tuber. And now I'm drawing the pose for when I'm not speaking. Hopefully cheating out to this 3/4 view doesn't look too odd when I use the PNG tuber. If it does, then I guess I'll probably end up drawing a new version where she's actually full on in profile. I so rarely draw characters looking straight on at the camera that I forgot that you need to make the eyes slightly cross-eyed to have them not be staring like 100 miles through you. And I wanted there to be an additional tea drinking pose for when there are gaps in the voiceover. One of the things I've been trying to nail down in the thumbnail graphic and in the PNG tuber is the exact distance between the horns and their placement and the exact angle they're at. So there's a certain amount of fussing that happens with them in this video. I really tried to simplify and stylize the bangs to make them readable at this small scale. This PNG tuber is so small that I had to use a smaller line art brush than I normally do to get it to read well and have as much detail as I wanted. This does mean that the line art for the PNG tuber is different than the line art for the frame, and I'm not sure whether that bothers me or not yet. If it does end up bothering me, I will just have to redraw the line art for the frame. It'll probably be fine though. Drawing a background was really humbling. It brought into focus for me how desperately I need to practice drawing environments to get them up at a level where it feels like they're not dragging my characters down. I've known this in the abstract, but it feels more real now. For a while, there was a reasonable excuse of how bad my health was, and just the fact that I was able to draw at all again was nice, and I was trying not to push my luck, but I feel like I should really knuckle down and try harder to work on my environments now. I think when I'm working at a smaller scale like this, it makes sense for the eyebrows and the eyelashes to just be their own line art layer without any sort of border to them. Also, I promise that when I finally get around to drawing a reference sheet for this version of T-Set, I will also draw a sheet of just her ears at different angles. It'll be good practice for me and good reference for people who want to draw her. Since I was working at such a small scale, I was really trying to keep the hair simple, not drawing it as complexly as I usually do. I toggled between the different frames so frequently while I was working on this to check to make sure that I was keeping the shapes consistent as her head turned. I tried to cut most of it out because I felt like it was pretty annoying to watch. I would also upload my progress to Patreon and toggle between the different frames there, and that allowed me to check for those consistencies without having just an insane amount of toggling between the frames in the recording. Even then, I had a lot to cut out, which I think additionally contributed to how big the library file for this video is. It's huge. I hope I have enough space to finish editing it on my dinky little laptop. But if you're seeing this, it must mean that I succeeded. I end up redrawing these teacups later. I did give myself hand and sleeve reference for these, although one of the frames has sleeves that I realize don't make sense, and so I have to redraw them, and I redrew them without much reference. The reason they didn't make sense is because I changed the torso pose slightly in a way and realized that the arms no longer made sense, so I just had to change it. I don't know that the footage for that is actually included in this, because at a certain point in the process I divided into a bunch of different duplicate files so that I could noodle around and tweak stuff. So I just picked one to include. Normally I would include stuff from all of them and edit them in. It's just that the library for this video is already taking up so much space on my computer. So you'll have to forgive me for leaving a tiny bit of my work out. I also end up changing this hand slightly because when I photographed it I had my pinky stuck out, but it just looked kind of strange at the foreshortened angle, so I end up redrawing it without any reference. Yeah, these are the sleeves that I end up redrawing. It's a shame because they're drawn really nicely, they just don't make sense, like they make the forearms too long. It's my fault for having bad posture in my reference photos and then trying to fix it in my drawing. I really do need to work on my posture. It's gotten so bad. Part of it is just that I'm so exhausted and in so much pain all the time that it doesn't feel worth it to exert the energy to sit up straight. But I really need to do it for my own health. I had such good posture when I was little because I played piano, and it just deteriorated as I became a teenager. But now it's time for flats. I often make my whites off-white, and I did start off like that with this, but end up changing my mind and making it stark white later on. An important thing to remember with buttons is that there will always be a gap between the sewn bottom and the bottom button. Sleeve cuffs, on the other hand, aren't necessarily the end of where the opening is. The end sometimes extends further up into the sleeve, so it's okay if your buttons fill up the cuff. Originally, the reason I liked drawing my Sona from this side is because it's the side that my part is on in real life, but now that her hairstyle has changed, the only real reason to prefer drawing her from this side is the little glass earring that is only on her right ear. Her left ear has 2 gold earrings instead. I still have to figure out what the earring is made of within the lore of T-Set. I think of it as glass-like when I draw it, but I think it would be better, considering that it's a magical tool, if I knew a specific material that it was made out of. While I continue to flat, why don't I tell you a little bit about house spirits? If you're new here, my Sona is a house spirit who goes by T-Set. In the world of T-Set's cottage, anytime a house is built, there is a chance that a house spirit will be born. The chances go up with craftsmanship and care. By nature, house spirits are benevolent and affectionate towards humans. This is by no means true of all spirits and fairies in this world, but the human residents of a house would have to be very disrespectful to turn their house spirit against them. House spirits can leave their house, but it makes them very vulnerable. If they decide to follow a family that is moving to a new home, there is no guarantee that that new home won't already be occupied by a house fairy, and house fairies are very territorial. It's simply unheard of for 2 house fairies to share a house, although there are cases of house fairies sharing an apartment building. It's exceedingly rare for house fairies to be born to apartment buildings, but sometimes they follow families there. Still, if multiple are in one apartment building, they usually end up sequestered to opposite ends of the building. That being said, while house spirits are very territorial towards their own kind, they are perfectly welcoming towards other fairies and spirits as long as they are not hostile towards the home or the family. And house spirits don't necessarily take humanoid forms like T-Set has. T-Set only took a humanoid form after realizing that the cottage had been lost to the humans. It's so that she can more comfortably exist within the cottage that is built for humans. In a humanoid form, she can more comfortably sit in the chairs, sleep in the beds, use the kitchen, and perhaps most importantly, comfortably draw. But the form of a house spirit doesn't even need to be tangible all the time. They can just kind of disappear into the house. Even though most of the chair and a lot of the background are going to be blocked by T-Set's body, I really wanted to fill them in, both in case I needed them in the future, and as an exercise in really starting to think about what the environment of the cottage is going to look like. What I've drawn here isn't necessarily canon, but it's a starting point. I hope by this time next year I will have more drawings of what the cottage looks like. But when it came to this, I was just feeling kind of overwhelmed, and I didn't really feel like spending the time to really thoroughly design a kitchen, so I mostly just looked at Claude Monet's kitchen. But I do plan on doing more research and really designing something in the future. Because Tset is a house fairy or house spirit, you can use them interchangeably, for a cottage, there would be periods of time where there would be no humans there, and so she would often go to sleep during those periods of time. But at one point, no humans came back, and she became sick, her magic leaking out of her body and into the cottage and surrounding forest. By the time she had woken up, she was very weak, and the cottage had fallen into a fold in the fabric of space, making it exceedingly difficult for humans to find it, but a bit of a haven for small spirits and fairies. As a result, Tset is unusually powerful for a house fairy within her cottage, but if she were to ever leave the cottage, she would be even more vulnerable than house fairies usually are. And in the time that she was asleep, the world outside has moved on and become unfamiliar. But with the help of friendly visitors, she has started to become more aware of the outside world. If I were to stream, some of these visitors would be NPCs that would visit the stream. I have ideas for some of them, but I'm in early stages. As always, patrons will be the first to see any concepts for those. I'd really like to make another video about the small fairies because I've been tweaking some of the designs. I just have to make some polished artwork to be the subject of the video. I could also use them to come up with objects that would populate the cottage. It's just a question of me finding the energy and the focus. I am keeping the PNG tuber mostly flat, but I am adding in my usual highlights. And I decided to have a closed-mouth version of the waving pose. Additionally, I tweaked the cuffs to be a little longer and have 3 buttons instead. Hello there. I hope you enjoy the new PNG tuber. I think she's very cute. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my patrons for your support.